From the Pueblo peoples of the southwest, known for their impressive cliff dwellings and advanced irrigation systems that allowed them to farm in the desert, to the Haudenosaunee Confederacy in the northeast, famous for its sophisticated governance model that influenced the democratic principles of the United States, indigenous communities exhibited remarkable diversity and ingenuity. They adapted to their environments in innovative ways, creating tools, clothing and shelters suited to their specific needs. These nations possessed a deep connection to the land, viewing it not as a commodity to be owned, but as a sacred source of life to be respected. This profound respect for nature was reflected in their sustainable practices and spiritual beliefs. Their traditions and knowledge, passed down through generations, ensured harmony with the natural world and provided a blueprint for sustainable living. They practiced crop rotation, controlled burns, and other methods that maintained the health of their ecosystems. The population of indigenous peoples was substantial, with estimates ranging from tens of millions to over 100 million inhabitants. These populations were spread across vast territories, each with its own unique culture and way of life. This rich tapestry of cultures, however, would face profound challenges with the arrival of European explorers in the late 15th century. The newcomers brought with them not only new technologies and goods, but also diseases and a different worldview. The encounter between these two worlds, vastly different in their values and worldviews, would have far-reaching consequences, shaping the course of North American history for centuries to come. Initial interactions were often marked by curiosity and exchange, but they soon gave way to conflict and colonization. The arrival of Europeans marked a turning point, setting in motion a series of events that would forever alter the cultural landscape of the continent. Indigenous ways of life were disrupted, and many communities faced displacement, disease, and warfare. Despite these challenges, indigenous cultures have endured and continue to thrive, preserving their rich heritage and contributing to the diverse tapestry of modern America. Across the ocean, European arrival and early encounters, driven by a thirst for exploration, wealth, and religious fervor, European powers set their sights on the Americas in the late 15th and early 16th centuries. The age of exploration was fueled by advancements in navigation and shipbuilding, allowing daring explorers to venture into uncharted waters. Christopher Columbus's voyages, while mistakenly landing in the Caribbean instead of reaching Asia, opened the floodgates for European exploration and colonization of the New World. His expeditions, sponsored by Spain, marked the beginning of a new era of global interaction and exchange. The Spanish, eager for gold and silver, established colonies in Central and South America, often exploiting indigenous populations for labor. Conquistadors like Hernán Cortés and Francisco Pizarro led brutal campaigns that resulted in the fall of powerful empires such as the Aztecs and the Incas. English, French, and Dutch explorers soon followed, seeking opportunities for trade, land, and religious freedom. Each nation had its own motivations and methods, leading to a diverse tapestry of colonial endeavors across the continent. The initial encounters between Europeans and indigenous peoples varied greatly. Some meetings were marked by curiosity and mutual benefit, while others were fraught with tension and misunderstanding. Some interactions involved peaceful exchanges of goods and knowledge. Indigenous peoples introduced Europeans to new crops such as maize, potatoes, and tobacco, while Europeans brought horses, metal tools, and firearms. However, cultural misunderstandings, economic ambitions, and the assertion of European dominance often led to conflict and exploitation. The imposition of European values and systems disrupted indigenous ways of life, leading to resistance and, at times, violent confrontations. The introduction of European diseases, such as smallpox, measles, and influenza, devastated indigenous populations. These diseases spread rapidly and with deadly effect, as indigenous peoples had no prior exposure and thus no immunity. With no immunity to these foreign illnesses, entire communities were decimated, weakening their ability to resist European encroachment. The loss of life was staggering, with some estimates suggesting that up to 90% of the indigenous population perished in the years following European contact. This period of initial contact set the stage for the complex and often tragic relationship between Europeans and indigenous peoples in the centuries that followed. The legacy of these early encounters is still felt today as indigenous communities continue to grapple with the long-term impacts of colonization. The arrival of Europeans marked the beginning of a long and painful chapter for indigenous communities, one characterized by displacement, disease, and cultural disruption. Despite the hardships, indigenous peoples have shown remarkable resilience and continue to fight for their rights and cultural preservation. Colonization, seeds of conflict, and resistance. As European powers sought to establish a permanent foothold in North America, colonization efforts intensified. The Spanish, with their early arrival, claimed vast territories in the south and southwest, while the English focused on the eastern seaboard. The French established settlements along the St. Lawrence River and the Great Lakes region, engaging in lucrative fur trade with indigenous nations. The English colonies, driven by a variety of motives, developed distinct characteristics. The New England colonies, founded by Puritans seeking religious freedom, emphasized community and piety. The middle colonies, such as Pennsylvania and New York, attracted diverse populations and developed thriving commercial centers. The southern colonies, with their reliance on cash crops like tobacco and rice, embraced a plantation system dependent on enslaved African labor. The influx of European settlers led to increasing competition for land and resources, fueling tensions with indigenous communities. Treaties were often broken, and indigenous peoples were forcibly removed from their ancestral lands. This displacement, coupled with the ongoing threat of disease, resulted in significant population decline and cultural disruption for indigenous societies. However, indigenous peoples actively resisted colonization, forming alliances, engaging in diplomacy, and waging war to defend their lands and ways of life. Revolution and independence. Forging a new nation. The journey to independence was a tumultuous and transformative period in American history, marked by a series of significant events and ideological shifts. By the mid-18th century, a growing sense of identity and dissatisfaction with British rule began to emerge in the American colonies. The colonists, who had developed their own distinct culture and political practices, started to see themselves as separate from their British counterparts. The colonists, accustomed to a degree of self-governance, chafed under increasingly restrictive British policies, particularly those related to taxation without representation. The imposition of taxes such as the Stamp Act and the Townshend Acts without any colonial input was seen as a direct affront to their rights. The cry of no taxation without representation encapsulated the colonists' grievances, highlighting their belief that they should not be subjected to laws imposed by a distant parliament in which they had no voice. This sentiment was widely disseminated through pamphlets, newspapers and public meetings, galvanizing public opinion against British rule. Events such as the Boston Tea Party, a dramatic act of defiance against British tea taxes, further inflamed tensions. Colonists disguised as Native Americans boarded British ships and dumped an entire shipment of tea into Boston Harbor, sending a clear message of resistance. In 1775, armed conflict erupted between British troops and colonial militiamen in Lexington and Concord, marking the beginning of the American Revolutionary War. These skirmishes demonstrated the colonists' willingness to take up arms in defense of their rights and liberties. The colonists, led by George Washington and inspired by ideals of liberty and self-determination, fought valiantly for independence. Washington's leadership and the resilience of the Continental Army were crucial in sustaining the revolutionary cause through years of hardship and battle. The Declaration of Independence, adopted on July 4, 1776, boldly declared the colony's separation from Great Britain. This seminal document, drafted primarily by Thomas Jefferson, articulated the philosophical justifications for independence and rallied support for the revolutionary effort. This document, grounded in Enlightenment principles of natural rights and popular sovereignty, proclaimed that all men are created equal and endowed with certain unalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These ideas resonated deeply with the colonists and provided a moral foundation for their struggle. The American Revolution, a pivotal moment in world history, inspired other nations to fight for their own freedom and challenge the established order of empires. The success of the American experiment in self-governance and democratic principles set a powerful example that reverberated across continents, influencing subsequent revolutions and the global quest for liberty.